Well, I had met Ed Teller at Los Alamos one day. We had a brief meeting and a talk. I had shortly thereafter moved to Las Vegas and basically left the scientific community to do other work. Some time later I decided to re-enter and send applications out to several other national labs, and also one to Ed Teller, and he gave me a call, and he said he might have something that I'd be interested in, and suggested that I go for an interview. Shortly thereafter, someone from EG&G called and told me to come down for an interview there. They made it very clear that EG&G had nothing to do with it. They were just using the building as a place to do the interview. After a short time, they said I was basically overqualified for the position, but they may have something else in the future. And I don't remember how much time lapsed after that, but shortly thereafter, they asked me to come down for another interview, and they said this was involving, I don't remember their exact wording, but they led me to believe it was a field propulsion system, and of course I thought it was something that, in secret, that we were working on. Later, only did I find out that it was a back engineering program dealing with alien craft. I flew out of Las Vegas McCarran Airport, and I flew to Groom Lake in a 737 aircraft. We land at Groom Lake, and there's a bus there that drives about 15 miles south, approximately. I'm really not sure exactly how far, down to a smaller dry lake bed known as Papoose Lake. And right up against the side of the mountain is the S4 installation.
And what happened to you first when you entered it? How did they receive you?
It was very military-like. It was certainly not a scientific atmosphere. Very high security. Everywhere you walked, you had to have an escort, an armed escort, even into the bathroom. All doors lock and open with your badge, and it was a very oppressive atmosphere.
How many times did you spend on this atmosphere before you saw the craft for the first time?
I believe I was only there 2 or 3 days, probably 2 days before I saw the craft.
Time, how they are stored, what your impression was, and your feelings when you saw it.
Well, my feelings, it was very I should step back a minute and say that when I first saw the craft the first time, it was walking into the hangar, and my impression was, well, this explains all the UFO sightings. This is just a secret military aircraft we're working on, and that's the end of that. It was actually the second time when I saw the craft, when I got to enter it and look over it, and I finally realized what was going on, that this is an alien craft. And of course this was after I read the briefings, and that was a totally different feeling. That was not a feeling of excitement. It was almost an ominous feeling, that a feeling as if you shouldn't even be there. It's very difficult to describe.
How did it look like?
It looked like, if anyone's familiar with Billy Meyer's sightings, very astonishingly similar to that craft. It was a very sleek, thin-looking, flying saucer-shaped craft. Kind of hard to describe without drawing it, but kind of a typical flying saucer shape.
Did you see just one type or different types?
There were 9 total. I only got to essentially work, back engineer, or analyze one of the craft, but there was a separate hangar for each of the crafts, and each one was essentially different in its visual appearance.
Did anybody tell you where the U.S. Navy intelligence got the craft from?
No, not at all. That's a lot of people have speculated about it, that they were either shot down or they crashed, but the craft seemed undamaged, so I doubt either of those would be correct.
Can you describe the inside of an alien craft?
It's very plain. It's all one solid color, a grayish pewter color, the same color as the outside of the craft. There are no sharp corners anywhere. Every device in the craft, the seat, the amplifier housings, everything has a rounded corner on it, almost as if it was all fashioned out of wax and then slightly melted, so everything curved, even where the ceiling meets the floor on the end. Everything has a curve to it. Very, very plain, very wide open, very impractical use of space. And there are 3 levels. The lower level houses the amplifiers themselves that swing, the 3 of them. The center level is where you enter the craft, where the seats and the amplifiers are, and the top level is a small area, and I did not have access to that, so I don't know what's up there.
Do you think they're alien craft or U.S. constructed?
Absolutely alien craft, there's no question about it.
Why?
Well, first of all, the scope of the project was to back engineer it. If they were United States craft, we wouldn't be going backward trying to find out how they were built if we had built them. Second of all, the size of the equipment inside, the size of the seats, the materials that were in use, completely alien to us, pardon the pun, and the fuel, element 115, essentially non-existent. All these factors together, and of course the briefing information stating that they were alien craft.
Could anybody tell you how the propulsion functioned?
Well, that was part of my job, was to back engineer that and find out exactly how that operated. And they had made some progress, but I really don't know how long the craft was there being analyzed, if it was 1 year or 10 years before I got there, but it seems like only a modest amount of progress had been made. The propulsion system is really an amazing setup. There's 2 parts. There's gravity amplifiers and the reactor that provides the power. The reactor itself is a total annihilation reactor fueled by antimatter. Total annihilation is essentially the most efficient nuclear reaction that takes place of the 3, fission, fusion, and annihilation. It uses a super heavy element, element 115, as it would appear on the periodic chart. None has yet been synthesized on Earth. It's my opinion that this occurs naturally in certain star systems. This element is bombarded in an extremely small accelerator. The element under bombardment undergoes spontaneous fission and produces antimatter particles. These are interacted with a gaseous matter target, and by means of a 100% efficient thermoelectric device is converted into electricity. Now, 100% efficient any electric device is essentially impossible. The first law of thermodynamics says that's basically impossible. There has to be waste heat and things of that sort, but there's none detected in this system. It's another amazing form of technology. This tremendous amount of power the system generates operates the amplifiers, and also as a byproduct of the 115 undergoing this bombardment, it produces a very interesting phenomena, a gravity A wave, as it's known to be called. This gravity A wave it travels in almost the same way microwaves travel. This is essentially applied to the gravity amplifiers, and by means of the electric current also provided by the reactor, it's amplified and focused. The amplified signal is shifted slightly out of phase, and by virtue of that they can repel or attract a gravitational body. The craft can take off on one gravity amplifier. There are 3 in this particular craft. When it's using just one amplifier, essentially pushing away from the Earth, it's known as Omicron configuration. For space travel, the craft will rotate up on its side, face the 3 gravity amplifiers at the target. They'll focus down on a single point some tremendous distance away, and the amplifier and the associated and the reactor, the associated reactor, will be run up to full power, and they essentially pull the fabric of space, distort space and time toward the craft, so they can traverse a tremendous amount of distance in virtually no time at all. They're not traveling in a linear fashion. They're essentially bending space and space, the fabric of space, essentially, and gravity and time are all interlaced. When you start distorting gravity, you distort time and space along with it. And these aren't theories. We've known these for a while. We just have no way of controlling them. But apparently, the civilization has found out how.
Did you people manage to fly one?
They've done several test flights in it, not out of the atmosphere. These are short, controlled, low-altitude flights. Essentially, they have a prized possession here, so they're not going to risk taking this to a point where they could potentially lose it, as at the gravitational pull of the Earth, or going too high. But I witnessed several tests outside the compound, and also one, probably about 100 feet away from the craft.
How did the craft behave in the flight?
Very, very quietly. It lifted off. It made a slight hissing sound, a slight blue glow from the bottom, probably due to the extreme voltage that's present on the craft. After a short time, that disappeared as it rose and just gently glided and later sat down. It was very uneventful, but almost totally silent.
Can you please describe the briefing documents and the information contained in it?
There were an extensive amount, 120 some odd briefing documents, all of them very short, and essentially what they were doing was just giving me an overview of the other aspects of the research being done on the craft, and the bulk of the information, all the technical information, was specifically dealing with the power and propulsion system, which is what I was supposed to be working on. But there were documents basically stating that these were aliens that possessed the craft. There were some autopsy reports that, not very in-depth. They had no reason to give me in-depth reports on that, but they did have pictures, and well, two pictures actually, of the alien carcass with the chest cut open and a single organ removed, and the organ itself was sectioned. It seemed to, from my non-medical viewpoint, it seemed that this one organ performed many functions instead of one. There were documents on metallurgical work being done on the craft, and really every aspect that separate groups were working on. And I'm sure they got a briefing on what my group was working on, a very abbreviated one, as I did on theirs.
And did they say where the aliens came from?
Yeah, it did mention the Zeta Reticuli system, and how that information was extracted from the craft, I don't know. Maybe there were star charts or something along those lines.
Did they contain any information about the history of mankind, the alien involvement in the history of mankind?
Not really. Nothing that said, well, this is the way things were. There was mention of alien intervention in the past. I mean, extremely long ago. Something along the lines of millions of years ago. For the information that I looked at, it seemed that, and there again, these are briefing documents, so I can't myself ascertain whether or not these are true. I can only assume it because the briefing documents I read that pertain to the propulsion system were true, because I dealt with that. But they did make reference to contact with the Earth over 10,000 years ago, also with genetic alterations that ended in a simian being, and all kinds of claims.
Did you ever meet an alien or some alien body?
Other than in pictures, no. I've mentioned several times that I'd walk through an area and looked in a small window and saw something small there, but I really can't say that was an alien body. A lot of people jump on that and say, yeah, you must have seen an alien, but there's just as much chance that they were trying to figure out the size difference and how the seats fit a body, and they had made up a small mannequin or something. I didn't see anything moving around alive. So I always say no, I have never seen a living alien.
Why do you think you were chosen for the job?
That's very difficult to say. I really don't know. I'm certainly not the most qualified as far as physics goes. So I really don't know. I approach things at a very different viewpoint. They might have been frustrated after a long time of walking down the same path and not getting anywhere, and they wanted someone essentially to come out of left field and approach it from a different angle with a different viewpoint, and I'm kind of known for that.
Why did you went public with the information?
When?
Why?
Why? That's, again, a complex question. It's not just one reason. There's several, stemming from many things. Harassment, to protect myself, the fact that this information being contained is also unfair, but there are many, many reasons.
After you went public, did they try to silence you in any way?
Oh, in every way. Yes, I was shot at while getting on the freeway here in Las Vegas. Friends were harassed and taken out of work that knew me. Many things happened.
In the summer of 1988, I was having this house appraised, and the appraiser brought along, the appraiser was interested in UFOs, and he brought along a friend of his who was a scientist, former scientist at Los Alamos. The appraiser, being interested in UFOs, wanted the opinion of this scientist on UFOs, and at that time I was doing a lot of lecturing. There was a lot of publicity about me and UFOs in the summer of '88. So I met this gentleman, Bob Lazar, and he didn't believe it at all. He told me that he worked at Los Alamos on SDI. He had a Q clearance. He had a number of other compartmentalized clearances. He knew a lot of secret things. He said that if there had been something like this, some cover-up, that he would have known about it. So over the next 3 or 4 months, we got to know Bob very well. He got to know us, and we passed him various information, which he checked out with the people that he knew that still worked at Los Alamos, specifically people who had access to the classified library. I told him that Project Grudge, which the Air Force told the public was canceled in 1949, was still active. He was able to determine through his friends who had access to the classified library at Los Alamos that it was still going on. There was another thing that I had mentioned, that one of the aliens that we had captured were kept at a secret place called a YY-2 facility. He, in fact, found out that there was a classified mail stop at Los Alamos called YY-2. Now, that doesn't mean they kept aliens there, but it showed that I knew secret things that were going on. There was enough evidence there that he thought, well, maybe there is something to this, and he wanted to find out. So having the specialized, highly educated person that he was, he held 2 degrees, master's degrees from MIT, and also knowing Dr. Teller, who was the father of the H-bomb, he was able to send his resume to Dr. Teller, who then called him and asked him where he wanted to work. Dr. Teller proposed 2 places, either EG&G in Las Vegas or Lawrence Livermore Laboratories in California. Bob said, I want to work at Area 51. He didn't tell Dr. Teller the reason, but he wanted to get as close as he could to where we thought the saucer testing was going on. Well, during the next 6 weeks after that, he was contacted by EG&G. He was given 3 security interviews and 3 interviews on his basic knowledge. They were so impressed that apparently they went ahead and hired him. The first thing that I knew is on December 6, 1988, Bob came up here as he usually did in the evening. I was sitting here writing checks, And he sat right in that seat, and I said, "What's going on, Bob?" And he said, "I saw a disc today." And I said, I was so startled, I thought I didn't hear him right. I said, "What?" And he said, "I saw a disc today." And I said, "Theirs or ours?" And he said, "Theirs." And I said, "You went to the test site?" He said, "Yeah, I just got back. This is the first time I went up there." I said, "Oh, my God." I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" I said, "Don't jeopardize your security clearance. Work up there for a while and find out what's going on." He said, "No." He said, "You've taken so much flack over this thing, people not believing you. I'm going to tell you exactly what I saw." And for the next 3 hours and 47 minutes, he proceeded to tell me exactly what he saw on his first trip up to S4 at the Nevada test site. And basically it was that, yes, we had 9 extraterrestrial vehicles. He told me a little bit about the power plants. He told me that he'd been briefed on the aliens that flew them. He told me that he'd been briefed on a number of other secret things. He told me that we, in fact, did have a secret base on the moon. He told me that we, in fact, did have a secret base on Mars. A number of things, some of which were so unbelievable, had I not known Bob to be truthful, I would have been very suspect. But I had known him for this period of time, and I had no reason to believe that he would tell me anything other but the truth. The only evidence that we got is we were able to steal or otherwise obtain a piece of the fuel that powers the saucers. It was element 115. It's a stable element, and we did several experiments with this. We also videotaped these experiments. The experiment was to prove the high gravitational attraction, the heaviness of the element, and other things. We proved it to ourselves. Unfortunately, whoever is in charge of the cover-up stole it back. The other thing was that on March 21st, 1989, he asked me if I wanted to view one of the test flights. This was on a Tuesday, and I said, "Well, sure, but how are we going to see one?" And he said, "There's going to be a test flight tomorrow night just at sunset. And I know a place where we can sneak in, still be on public land, and watch it." I said, "Great." So I said, "Why at sunset?" And he said, "Well, statistically, up in that area, there's the least traffic around then." So I drove with Bob and the real estate appraiser, Gene Huff, and myself, and we drove up there, got there just a little bit before sunset. I took my Celestron telescope, we took a video camera, got out of the car, and within maybe 10 or 15 minutes, this disc comes up from behind the mountains and starts doing all these fantastic maneuvers. It was a light, a very bright light, and you couldn't see the disc form. But I had my Celestron scope with me, which is 8 inches, extremely powerful, and after a few minutes I was able to get it right in the finder of the Celestron telescope, and I saw for myself it was a disc. There was no question in my mind, and I just watched it go down behind the mountains. Area 51 was basically a Navy training base until 1955, when, in conjunction with the CIA, Lockheed made a secret test base out of it. And the reason was to test the U-2. In 1959, 60, and 61, they also tested the SR-71 out of there, and it became a perfect area in which to test secret equipment and secret airplanes. It was because it was so remote. It was bounded on all sides by mountains, and it was essentially a million miles from nowhere. The security that it provided was just exactly what they needed. After 1960, it became a area to test not only planes, but equipment, machinery, all kinds of secret things that they had. In 1972, there is, according to my research, a complete blackout of detailed information, records, what have you, for a period of 18 months. Nobody knows what happens between the summer of '82 and I think it was summer of '72 and January of 74. There's absolutely no records. I talked to security guards. They don't know what happened there. I don't know what happened there. I don't really have any suspicions because the flying saucer program began, Project Red Light began, it's my information, in earnest at Groom Lake in 1960. They did attempt to fly one or two of the craft. There was a major accident, and the testing operations shut down for a number of years. The testing operations began in earnest again, I believe, in 1980, 81, 82, around that area. And the reason I say that is because the security increased drastically during that period. And I believe that just south of Groom Lake, which is in the northeast corner of the Nevada test site, is a place called Papoose Lake. It's a dry lake. There's a secret area there called S4, and I believe that that's where they test the saucers out of. My sources are varied, but the primary source being Bob Lazar, who worked on one of the 9 saucers that were stored there.